Hi folks, we're Tacitus today. Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about something I've been talking about quite a bit for the last several days. There's an international media campaign, whether it's Canada, Australia, the United States, Britain, Ireland, it doesn't matter. All across the white Western world, there's this coordinated and targeted media campaign to say that, well, it's terrible. White countries, the West, just not having enough babies. It's also happening, in other countries like South Korea and Japan, for example. But focusing on the West in these articles, not having enough babies, not enough births. So the solution is just bring in more third world illiterate peasants. And if that doesn't work, then you bring in double more illiterate third world peasants. If that doesn't work, then you bring triple more. You just keep on the fuck going with third world mass immigration until the problem doesn't exist anymore. And if the problem is not having enough procreation isn't going at the sufficient rate, then you just keep on bringing in mass migrants, and then that's the only solution. But to have white Western women having more babies, that's Handmaid's Tale, that's oppression, that's Nazi, that is fucking Hitler, and that can't be allowed. So that's not an option. So we're back to black, brown, third world peasants. So that's pretty much the thrust of the article when you strip away the niceties. But again, there's a failure, in my view, there's a failure to come to grips with what are the real issues here. Now, I'll separate them up. Firstly, you've got economic sort of value and utility. Are you efficiently using the resources you have before you bring in more resources that are of a lower utility? So an illiterate third world peasant cannot contribute to the society, to the economy, to business, to anything at all, to the same extent that the local people can. They don't have, they've got mostly an IQ of 70, very different behavior, very poor command, if any command of English. They've never worked at anything in their lives. They've come from a third world rural peasant village thatched hut economy and social structure. What the fuck use are they going to be in a first world country? Well, they're not. Beyond burger flipping and toilet cleaning, there's just nothing they can really do. So we've got efficient use of the resources you have, or bringing in much less efficient resources, human resources in this case, to prop up the economy. Now, clearly, this is a retrograde step. There's no other way of looking at it. And if we consider Samuelson's law of elasticity, economic elasticity, which is, look it up, go online. I encourage listeners to look this up. Samuelson's argument is, and I'll make this simple, Samuelson's argument is that there's a point at which you have maximum efficiency of the resources. And he uses an example, among others, but he uses the example of a farm where the farmer only has one worker, and the worker can't do everything. The crows are eating all the seeds that are being planted, and they can't plant enough in the planting season because there's only one worker. They can't harvest all the crops, before they spoil in the field and this sort of stuff. So the farmer hires another worker. And so with one worker, they produce again, I'll simplify this, they produce 1 bushel of wheat. But with 2 workers, they're able to produce 3 bushels of wheat. So the productivity jumps up here. And when they go to then 4 workers or 5 workers, they're then producing 20 bushels of wheat. So the efficiency ratio is increasing. For each new worker can specialize, one guy does the planting, or everyone on board do the harvesting. There's someone to scare away the crows that are eating the corn and the seeds and so on. So they become far more efficient. But by the time they get to, for example, 10 workers, they've reached a point of maximum efficiency. So each worker is now producing 3 bushels of wheat each. And that's the point of it. But by the time they add the 11th worker, that 11th worker only adds one more bushel of wheat in productive output. By the time they had the 12th worker, that 12th worker is only producing half a bushel of wheat. And by the time they've got the 15th worker, it's actually going negative because they're tripping over each other. They're spending more time arguing, bickering. They're playing petty politics. People are, I didn't like the way the foreman spoke to me today. I'm going to take a sick day. Screw that motherfucker. Those sorts of things are happening. So they've become now less efficient given the total resources they have available. So this is the case in the Western world. Whatever the population, in terms of the consumer mass and so on, whatever the population is, that is at the maximum point of efficiency. I'm not sure what that is, by the way, but if you look at sort of the efficiency of an economy in terms of production, productive output, and so on, then there's a point at which there's too many people on welfare. Politically, the government's leaning on companies to say, no, we can't have unemployment. You've got to employ all these people. You've got to have bloated payrolls. We can't sustain the political fallout from high unemployment, or forcing companies to open their businesses and factories in places where there is higher unemployment in order to try and again create fake political business solutions to give political answers to the ruling elites. So it starts to become very inefficient, and there's a point at which an economy can no longer have a level of productive efficiency when the population passes a certain point. Now, in Britain, even in the 60s and 70s, they were starting to aggressively promote the idea of British people emigrating to places like Australia or Canada and New Zealand and so on, suggesting quite clearly that the government thought there was a surplus population that they needed to get rid of. These people actually couldn't be employed. So it becomes, at what point does the economic efficiency an issue? Now, the globalists have thrown this overboard, this whole idea of economic efficiency. Screw economic efficiency. Will debt subsidize mass inefficiency to get mass consumerism, and that mass consumerism will be deficit funded and will be funneled back through monopoly and oligopoly business. So the idea of productive use of resources, or any idea of productivity, is considered to be absolute nonsense, or irrelevant, or minimally relevant in the globalist scheme of things. Now, coming back to this issue of births or declining birth rates, no one can dispute birth rates are declining, but this pretend of being bewildered, we don't know why. Well, why? Why is the birth rate declining? We just don't know why. And this, of course, is absolute nonsense. It sticks out like a sore thumb why, and there are numerous causes to do with cost of living and so on, but also the idea that certainly when I was in final year high school, the year before me, when I was in the final year of high school, girls who'd left high school the year before, finished high school the year before, they were, and these were, you were considered quite highly educated if you had a senior high school graduation certificate back in those days. You even got extra on your pay. These girls were, and they were getting married pretty much straight out of high school, and then they were procreating, the year following. So there were girls coming to school to show their girlfriends their newborn baby, and sometimes with a husband in tow, but a newborn baby. And I thought they were terribly grown up, these girls. Oh goodness me, married, children, how grown up they are, and I felt myself to be something of a child in comparison, back in the day, and this was how it was. And again, I'm not a million years old. This is all within my lifetime. And it wasn't uncommon. There were plenty of girls getting married straight out of high school. And this was in an upper middle class area, by the way. In a working class area, girls were getting married at 16 and procreating at 17. This too wasn't unusual. I guess there's been, well, I guess there has been, some huge changes in societal structure where the idea, well, if we have more women working, we have more workers, thus more consumers, and it dampens down the union activity. Now, union wage sort of activism, at the time that the elites began to say, hey, we got to get more women into the workforce, union activism was at its zenith. It was already a spent force, in my view, and it was just all you had to do is wait it out, and the whole thing would have collapsed anyway. Natural attrition through being overtaken by Japanese products and so on. That the West was no longer competitive at this point, and this would have had a natural attrition effect on manufacturing and mining, where unions were concentrated or union powers concentrated. So that would have happened anyway. So the idea of trying to force en masse women into the workforce was really a double hit to the Western economies, because it wasn't a pursuit of efficiency, it wasn't a pursuit of more productive output, it was a pursuit of disrupting and diluting union power, and then minimizing wage growth. And so that was and so it was at that point that efficiency and productivity was abandoned in favor of dilution and again, simply creating mass consumerism. That was the model going forward, and this is what we see today. So, looking at and I took some notes here, which I'll refer to now about. So this is in the West. Women between the ages of 17 and 21 are supposed, depending on whose numbers you look at, by the way, there's quite a variance here depending on what questionnaire or what statistics you look at. But women between the ages of 17 and 21, or 18 and 21, I think this really is, are having 25% fewer births than 50 years ago. Now, certainly by my experience, women at under the age of 21 or under already had one or two children, and it was a widespread thing. It wasn't a rarity. I don't know if there was a majority of them would have had two children by 21, but certainly many that I know, but not all. Now, women today between the age of 22 and 32 are having 40% fewer births than 50 years ago. That seems excessive to me. Maybe it's true, but it seems to be excessive. Now, in terms of polls that are taken, there's the claim here, number of polls, that only between 55-60% of girls in senior high, this is girls who would already be 17 or 18, included marriage as even a possible life option, not even a first life option or a priority option, but as a possible one among many. Then we look at the situation of college. Now, the amount of girls that went to university, certainly when I was finishing high school, was senior high school, there was hardly any girls went to university, and the ones that did were all going into the soft courses like peace studies and those sorts of things. I know there's one girl who went into chemistry, I think it was, and she was considered to be an absolute novelty, like a talking point in the community, given the rarity of it. Margaret Thatcher, I think, did chemistry as well. So girls going to college then takes, given most girls left school at 15 or 16, they were married by 17, they procreated by 18. That was quite common, not universal, but common. So girls were encouraged to stay on at high school, do senior high school. So that knocks them out from, the marriage procreation game for a couple of years, 1 or 2 years there. Then they go to college. It knocks them out for another 3 years. They're now 21, 22. And they've got now a, 40, 50, 60,000 or more college debt. And so what are they going to do? Looking at on the internet now, it's girls are saying, look, I got a $60,000 college debt. I'll never be able to pay it off. I got to meet a rich guy who'll pay it for me. I'm not sure that's the basis for starry-eyed romance or anything, but that's the stuff that's going around. So now the girl's 20, got her carrying a big debt from some bullshit college job. She's been radicalized that the world's full of Nazis and so on. She's out looking for a job and finds that she can't get a job or can't get any meaningful, worthwhile jobs. She ends up being a barista or working in some bullshit retail job or something like that. Maybe she thinks, well, the reason I can't get a good job is because I need to go back to college and get an even bigger debt and do even more, lesbian dance theory studies and so on. So the expectation that the girls have when they're out, if you add up the time that about a third, give or take, about a third of births that occurred 50 years ago occurred in that window of a junior high school diploma, which is all 99% of girls used to get a junior high school diploma, to graduation from a university, and often they're taking a year of in between. So that's where a third of the births used to occur 50 years ago that are not occurring today. So you say pretty much all the well, maybe not all, but nearly all the procreation shortage comes from there. Now, the other big factor that occurs is the amount of abortions. In Australia alone, something like 90,000 abortions a year. Now, a lot of those are from high school girls at 14 or 15, so that needs to be put into some context. But there's a decent amount of those births, or those abortions rather, that are in women over the age of 18. Those abortions wouldn't have occurred years ago. Either the baby would have been born and put out to say foster families, which a lot were back in the day, or the baby would be born and there would be a marriage, even if it was a bit of a shotgun marriage. And those certainly went on when I was a kid, when I was a young man. It'd be whispered around, did you know that, Janie had to marry Bobby because she got pregnant and Bobby, did the right thing and made an honest woman out of her, this sort of stuff. And but this is where the births have gone. Now, what is necessary to build the birth rate? That was a strong component against that. If you want white women to have babies, well, fuck me, that's the Handmaid's Tale story. This is Hitler. This is I'm swastika. I mean, you're going to go Sieg Heil on me, you motherfucker. So there's a very strong and prominent attitude that encouraging white women to have more children is it's just that's it. It's Nazi, and it's nothing else to it. And the idea that girls are strongly discouraged from perceiving family and so on as a life option is certainly a prominent ideological sort of thread that's going through, even to the extent where family may be considered an option. Young girls have been encouraged to believe that all straight white males or all men are all Nazi oppressor, wife bashing, pedophile, fascist, and da. So there's already an inclination to look at relationships in a very negative light, which can't be a good thing. But I do want to come back to this idea of as a socioeconomic structure. There was a time when efficiency was considered to be the business model, the social business model, efficient use of the resources you have. That's been thrown over now to it's the massive resources you have. And it doesn't matter how inefficiently they're used. It doesn't matter how many illiterate peasants you bring in. They're going to consume something. And whatever they consume, it's a good thing. And then through that consumption, we have, so the globalists will tell you, some sort of a viable socioeconomic model. Now, the point at which efficient use of resources has been passed is now long gone. The idea that efficient use of resources is and should be some sort of priority is almost laughed out of the room now. And this is where I'm going here. That is fewer births a bad thing? Is a declining population a bad thing? Because if that declining population encourages or brings about or brings into existence a new idea or revisited idea and notion and practice of efficient use of resources, then that can only be a good thing. And I believe that the more population mass is viewed as a good thing, the less efficient we're going to be and are and will be and continue to be. And therefore revisiting this idea of a smaller population but more efficient use of resources is, I think, the necessary direction the West should take. You've been Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.